In December 1993, a single rooftop in Medellin became the final stage of a 16-month manhunt. This is the story of Pablo Escobar, billionaire trafficker, political puppet master, and folk hero to his own people. But how did a barrio kid outsmart two governments, amass unimaginable wealth, and plunge an entire nation into narco terror? And today we'll trace his meteoric rise from working-class streets to the world's most wanted, and the operation that finally brought him down. If you love deep dive history, hit subscribe and ring the bell now. Keep watching to uncover the secrets of El Patron's empire. In the mist-shrouded Aburrá Valley, Medellin rose like an iron colossus against emerald mountains. Its factories exhaled plumes of industry that mingled with the scent of coffee drifting through narrow streets. Gleaming skyscrapers cast long shadows over ramshackle barrios clinging to steep hillsides. Here, wealth and want coexisted in perilous balance, each breath carrying hope and fear. It was in this crucible of ambition and inequality that a new power would emerge. Colombia in the early 1970s still bore scars of La Violencia, the civil war that once sundered families. Political reform under President Alfonso López seemed to promise stability even as old rivalries smoldered. American demand for narcotics whispered through diplomatic cables and clandestine corridors. Rural coca farmers watched government inspectors and guerrilla patrols with equal suspicion. Underneath official calm, the narcotics trade was gestating like a storm in the highlands. In the humid lowlands of Putumayo and Cauca, coca shrubs flourished in clandestine fields. Small-time traffickers paid farmers cash they could spend on medicine and machetes. Each barrel of coca paste began a clandestine odyssey toward the United States. Jungle paths twisted like serpents, guiding brigades of mules and men through shadowed trails. By the time the product reached Medellin, its value had multiplied tenfold. In backroom gatherings at local cantinas, traffickers traded rumors of success and betrayal. The Ochoa brothers, sons of wealthy cattle ranchers, began to refine smuggling techniques. Their network relied on bribed officials as much as on snarling muscle in the streets. Whispers of limitless profits attracted ambitious young men hungry for power. Among them stood Pablo Escobar, eyes sharp with conviction and a restless hunger. Born in Rio Negro and raised in Medellin's working-class barrios, Escobar learned early to prize loyalty above all. As a schoolboy, he hoarded coins stolen from classmates and dreamed of fortune. His childhood mischief foreshadowed a ruthless genius for navigating moral gray zones. Escobar's teenage years found him in petty theft rings, where he discovered the rush of illicit gain. Even then, the seeds of his transformation into a narco king were sown. By the late 1970s, Escobar had graduated from stolen cars to cross-border cocaine shipments. He forged alliances with local politicians who saw in him a source of easy campaign funds. His charisma won whispers of a Robin Hood among impoverished neighborhoods. Escobar distributed money and small loans while sharpening his control through tacit violence. In hidden warehouses on Medellin's outskirts, the city's first vast cocaine labs took shape. Gustavo Gaviria, Escobar's cousin and trusted lieutenant, managed shipping logistics with precision. Under Gustavo's watch, planes and boats loaded with paste slipped past customs with forged papers. The Mediterranean-style villas of Escobar's early cartel operatives glowed under yard lights. With each successful voyage, the cartel's coffers swelled into unimaginable wealth. The spoils of this burgeoning empire began to rewrite Medellin's social fabric. Jorge Luis Ochoa cemented ties with Escobar by sharing family contacts in the Colombian elite. His influence opened doors in banks and real estate circles, laundering millions in broad daylight. The trio's ambitions eclipsed those of previous traffickers, hinting at a cartel on the rise. Business cards for Medellin enterprises quietly circulated among executives and officials. Yet beneath polite greetings, the cartel's true currency was fear. In dim warehouses, chemistry students perfected refinement techniques that boosted purity to 85%. The crackling heat of gas burners mingled with the acrid smell of solvents. Each crystal of cocaine became a concentrated promise of addiction and profit. Meticulous record-keeping ensured zero losses in product or payment. The cartel's laboratories operated like well-oiled machines hidden in plain sight. Smuggling corridors fanned out from Medellin to Panama, Florida, and beyond. Pilots flew clandestine flights under translucent moonlight, guided by smuggler lookouts on remote beaches. Boats disguised as fishing vessels rattled across the Caribbean to meet waiting buyers. Every successful drop emboldened the cartel to expand its territory. The world's richest black market economy was taking shape. Escobar reinvested fortunes into humble barrios, building clinics, schools, and soccer fields. Neighbors who once feared him now hailed him as a savior of the poor. His henchmen enforced respect with blunt force when needed, balancing terror with generosity. In graffiti-scrawled alleyways, murals of Escobar's smiling face began to appear. For the masses, the lines between crime lord and community benefactor blurred. Fueled by his local popularity, Escobar launched a bid for a seat on Medellin's city council. His campaign speeches brimmed with promises to uplift forgotten neighborhoods. Political rivals recoiled at the idea of a trafficker in government chambers. Yet tens of thousands of votes propelled him into public office. The cartel's influence had now crept into the heart of Colombia's democracy. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla vowed to expose Escobar's network in Bogotà's halls of power. Lara's speeches carried the ring of moral conviction and legal resolve. Escobar's eyes seethed with contempt as he watched from his Mercedes-Benz. The stakes were now unmistakably political, and the sheriff had called for blood. Medellin's skies darkened with the promise of confrontation. President Betancourt faced pressure from Washington to curb the cocaine pipeline. Yet calls for extradition treaties collided with fears of provoking cartel wrath. In palace corridors, ministers debated a course between appeasement and outright war. Each decision threatened to tip the nation into chaos or capitulation. The country stood at the brink of a narco-state nightmare. U.S. federal agents began questioning Colombians in Miami nightclubs about burgeoning cocaine rings. Intelligence cables labeled Escobar public enemy number one. Medellin's upper crust trembled as undercover operations spread like tendrils. The cartel's financial web spanned continents and confronted superpower politics. An unseen chess game now played out on the global stage. At home, Escobar retreated to a modest hacienda where his wife, Maria Victoria, tended orchids. The couple's two children laughed in corridors, never suspecting their father's dark empire. Behind closed doors, Escobar's veneer of family man coexisted with whispered paranoia. Bodyguards patrolled the grounds as if guarding a head of state rather than a trafficker. Even his private sanctuary bore the imprint of the cartel's reach. In Washington, policymakers drafted the first versions of Plan Colombia without naming names. Senators argued that drug money financed guerrilla warfare still haunting Colombia's jungles. The specter of Marxist insurgents and narco barons tangled into a singular threat. Congressional hearings streamed grainy videos of lab raids deep in the mountains. Public opinion began to see cocaine not as vice alone, but as a geopolitical weapon. Back in Medellin, local police forces found their budgets drained by cartel bribes. Honest officers risked their lives to gather evidence against an enemy with limitless resources. Fearful of retaliation, few dared to testify in court. Witnesses vanished or returned with their families on makeshift pyres. Law enforcement teetered between corruption and cowardice. Meanwhile, newspaper headlines oscillated between hagiography and horror stories. El Patrón, the generous benefactor, or El Doctor, the merciless killer. Public opinion fractured. Murals of Escobar's face stood beside spray-painted warnings in barrio alleys. The city seemed to breathe his name in pulses of fear and devotion. Medellin had become the center of a conflicted mythology. As night fell, the distant hum of trafficker convoys rolled through mountain passes. Even the stars seemed to dim under the weight of unseen violence. In hidden laboratories, new batches of cocaine glinted like deadly jewels. The cradle of Escobar's empire lay poised to ignite a national crisis. And so, beneath a brewing storm, the deadly dance between state and cartel was set to begin. In the days following Rodrigo Lara's assassination, the streets of Bogotá crackled with indignation and grief. Newspapers carried photos of Lara's lifeless body, emblazoned beneath headlines demanding justice. Citizens marched under banners that denounced narco impunity as a stain on the republic's honor. The shock of a minister gunned down in broad daylight shattered any illusion of safe political dissent. A nation once hesitant now bristled with resolve to confront its internal enemy. Within weeks, Congress voted to reinstate the extradition treaty with the United States. Lawmakers argued that only foreign prisons could contain traffickers who had outgrown domestic jails. Victims' families watched the debate with trembling hope that justice might cross borders. Yet shadowy threats loomed as traffickers warned of reprisals for every ally of extradition. The treaty became a lightning rod dividing Colombia's elite and its underground. Pablo Escobar emerged from the fray with a defiant broadcast labeling extradited narcos as traitors. He donned the mantle of a man besieged, promising his followers a war unlike any before. In hidden compounds, a coterie of traffickers adopted a chilling new moniker, Los Extraditables. Their charter demanded the abolition of extradition or an all-out campaign against the state. Thus was born the cartel's formal declaration of war on Colombian institutions. By autumn 1984, anonymous leaflets fluttered from helicopters over Medellin, bearing stark threats. Judges faced a choice between their lives and adherence to foreign courts. Each pamphlet bore Escobar's whispered promise: obey or die. The luminous valley below trembled under the weight of unseen vendettas. Fear became the cartel's most potent weapon in corridors of justice. On April 6, 1985, a car bomb ripped through the Palace of Justice in Bogotá. 11 Supreme Court justices perished in an instant of blinding violence. The blast shattered granite walls and the illusion of untouchable sovereignty. Observers grappled with the realization that Colombia's highest institutions were vulnerable. The judiciary recoiled, its chambers haunted by echoes of destruction. Remarkably, cartel money had funded a parallel operation: the M19 guerrilla siege of the same palace. Gunmen stormed the building, taking hostages in a doomed attempt to overthrow extradition policy. The army's counter-assault left hundreds dead, including civilians caught in crossfire. Witnesses described corridors filled with smoke, despair, and shattered ideals. The siege underscored the dangerous liaisons between revolutionary fervor and narco capital. Outrage swelled among Colombians who longed for peace, but feared continued terror. President Belisario Betancourt's offers of dialogue with traffickers were met with suspicion. Human rights advocates decried any negotiation with criminals who reveled in indiscriminate carnage. Yet the government teetered between amnesty overtures and calls for harsh reprisals. The nation stood riven by competing visions of resolution. In Washington, President Ronald Reagan dispatched DEA advisors to Bogotá in 1986. A clandestine cell of American experts began mapping coca labs with satellite imagery. Colombian generals wrestled with foreign counsel as they honed counter-narcotics strategy. The embassy's armored convoys became a fixture outside police headquarters. Globalized drug enforcement had arrived on Colombian soil. At the helm of the newly formed search bloc stood Colonel Hugo Martinez, a hardened detective. His unit, resourced by U.S. aid, trained in guerrilla warfare tactics to pursue cartel kingpins. Tracking bracelets replaced paperwork in the quest to trace Escobar's every move. Anonymous tip lines lit up with fearful calls from informants and double agents alike. The hunt for El Patrón had evolved into a shadow war across mountain hideouts. Meanwhile, Escobar fortified his mountain estates in the Andes as citadels against assault. His men tunneled escape routes beneath lavish villas, concealing kilos of cash in walls. Aviator windows overlooked private runways where small planes awaited clandestine takeoff. Sentries armed with AK-47s patrolled the mist-clad peaks at dawn. These aerial redoubts became symbols of his unassailable dominion, until proven otherwise. In Medellin, skirmishes between rival cartels intensified as they vied for turf. Automated rifles and grenades thundered through crowded markets, seeding panic. Innocent bystanders found themselves flecks of dust in a war of empires. Ambulances ran constant circuits, ferrying the wounded to overrun clinics. The city's vibrant pulse had turned into a staccato beat of siege. Within the cartel's inner circle, tensions flared over Escobar's autocratic methods. Gustavo Gaviria urged caution to preserve their growing international networks. Jorge Luis Ochoa, eyeing profit margins, chafed at the violent spotlight on their enterprise. Yet none dared openly challenge El Patrón's iron resolve. Loyalty remained the coin of highest value, tempered by fear and fascination. By mid-1989, aircraft bombings and letter bombs had become macabre trademarks of narco terror. Even diplomatic missions in Bogotá tightened security behind concrete barriers. Embassy staff whispered rumors of cell phone intercepts capturing cartel convoys. Every bureaucrat felt the weight of an invisible iron hand in their daily routines. The state apparatus rattled under the cartel's relentless drumbeat. The bombing of Avianca Flight 203 on November 27, 1989 shattered any remaining illusions of limited conflict. The cyclone of evidence pointed back to Escobar, whose audacious order targeted political foes. International outrage engulfed Colombia in a storm of condemnation. President Cesar Gaviria, newly elected, vowed an uncompromising offensive. The world watched as the final showdown loomed. Under mounting pressure, Gaviria's administration reopened secret talks with Escobar's emissaries. Negotiators labored in dimly lit rooms, feasting on tamales amid whispered guarantees. Government advisors debated the moral calculus of granting sanctuary versus securing surrender. Meanwhile, Escobar's lieutenants sent coded cables pledging cooperation. Each side prepared to leverage the fragile pact to its strategic advantage. On June 19, 1991, Escobar surfaced at a police station in a crisp suit and trademark grin. He surrendered under terms that barred extradition and granted him residence in his own prison. Cameras clicked as officers escorted El Patrón through corridors festooned with bulletproof glass. For a fleeting moment, the trafficker's expression held a mix of triumph and misgiving. Colombia had bought peace at the price of paradox. La Catedral, nestled in a mountainous retreat, welcomed its most infamous inmate. Inside, hand-picked guards answered to Escobar rather than the state. A marble-floored chamber doubled as a discotheque, where narco celebrations rang out nightly. Medical suites boasted hydrotherapy pools that contrasted sharply with squalid public jails. The luxurious prison fell under the cartel's informal jurisdiction. From his sanctum, Escobar continued to orchestrate shipments and order retributions. Rival cell leaders found themselves abducted and tortured outside his fortified walls. Evidence of illicit operations circulated freely among his pampered cadre. Secret microphones picked up the roar of his laughter at elaborate banquets. The state's gamble on containment teetered on the brink of collapse. By early 1992, whispers of government impatience grew louder in ministerial offices. Pressure mounted to transfer Escobar to a conventional penitentiary or risk public fury. Some cabinet members feared that La Catedral had become an overt cartel embassy. Protesters demanded action, waving placards that proclaimed "No more narco castles." The fragile truce frayed at its edge under the weight of betrayal. As rain lashed the mountain roads, the search bloc prepared orders for a decisive operation. Colonel Martinez studied aerial photographs, eyes tracing every guard post and tunnel entry. In La Catedral's glow, Escobar toasted loyalty while spies and soldiers closed in. The long, tortuous buildup was ready to snap toward its inevitable confrontation. Rising tension crackled through Colombia's spine, only fate awaited the signal to explode. In early July 1992, Colombia's president decreed that La Catedral had exceeded its purpose. Ministers argued that the makeshift prison served as Escobar's personal fortress. Orders went out for his transfer to a conventional penitentiary in Bogotá. Behind closed doors, El Patrón's advisors warned of grave consequences. The nation held its breath as the deadline for relocation approached. On the evening of July 19th, Escobar learned of the government's ultimatum. In candlelit halls lined with opulent tapestries, his face flickered with dark calculation. Guards whispered as they barricaded cell doors and burned confidential files. Outside, thunder rolled across the Andes as if heralding a storm of violence. No one yet foresaw the scale of the betrayal to come. Under cover of torrential rain, Escobar slipped through hidden tunnels beneath La Catedral. A loyal convoy waited on a winding mountain road, engines idling in shadow. With precision born of paranoia, the escape unfolded in near silence. When morning broke, the prison lay empty of its most notorious occupant. The state's gamble had collapsed in a heartbeat. News of the breakout detonated across national television and radio waves. Colombia's police forces mobilized under emergency orders. The search bloc, now a lean task force, prepared to hunt its most elusive quarry. Satellite phones crackled with coded coordinates and frantic tip-offs. Every mountain pass became a potential refuge or trap. Escobar vanished into the humid jungle corridors of Antioquia. He donned disguises, caps, glasses, mustaches, to elude recognition. In remote hamlets, villagers spoke of a mysterious benefactor passing through. Each sighting sparked simultaneous hope and dread among locals. The fugitive lord had become a phantom of the mountains. Colonel Hugo Martinez intensified patrols along the Medellin-Bogotá highway. Roadblocks sprouted overnight like concrete flowers in valley towns. Agents scanned interiors of buses and trucks for hidden compartments. Smuggler informants weighed bribes against survival instincts. The net tightened around an adversary with limitless cunning. Escobar's phone line crackled to life with clandestine messages. Code names like El Aeropuerto and La Perla identified safe houses. Radio intercepts captured his voice ordering new drops of cash. Each intercepted syllable was decrypted by joint DEA police squads. Technology and tradition clashed in the hunt for a modern outlaw. Guillermo Palomari, the cartel's money man, turned state's witness under immunity. His testimony unraveled layers of cartel financing and hidden caches. Investigators mapped dozens of rural properties tied to Escobar's fortune. Night vision goggles revealed clandestine airstrips carved into the hills. The mirror of betrayal reflected El Patrón's empire fragmenting. In September 1993, Escobar retaliated with a devastating car bomb in Cali. The blast leveled a city block and left dozens dead. Public outrage surged as innocent lives were consumed in narco revenge. President Gaviria declared zero tolerance for further aerial or vehicular terror. The manhunt transformed from cautious pursuit into all-out war. Search Bloc intelligence pinpointed Escobar in a middle-class Medellin barrio. A network of undercover officers converged on the modest brick home. Surveillance drones hovered above rustling mango trees at dawn. Signals analysts traced his cell phone to a single rooftop. The moment of reckoning drew near beneath muted morning light. On December 2, 1993, a team of agents sealed off the neighborhood's exits. A phalanx of armored vehicles blocked narrow streets in tactical formation. El Patrón, alerted to the dragnet, climbed to a rooftop with a companion. His silhouette stood stark against an overcast sky. Time seemed to pause as both hunter and hunted braced for confrontation. Agents radioed final coordinates to command before advancing on the target. The rooftop beneath Escobar's feet groaned with each silent footstep. Rain drizzled, pattering on corrugated metal and muddy tiles. El Patrón scanned the horizon, eyes gleaming with defiance. His breathing echoed like thunder in the tense stillness. In a burst of motion, officers sprinted up scaffolded stairs toward the rooftop. Enrique Caprilos's trained sniper aimed from a distant vantage point. A volley of bursts shattered the humid air in sharp staccato. El Patrón clutched his side, darkening blood seeping through his shirt. The world's most wanted trafficker stumbled backward in shock. Shots rang out from close quarters as backup teams closed in. Escobar, wounded, attempted to crawl beneath a rusted water tank. Officers ordered him to surrender, voices steeled by months of pursuit. His final defiance flickered in a pained squint, lips parted in anguish. Then silence descended, broken only by distant wails of sirens. At 6:15 p.m., El Patrón lay lifeless beneath a weeping sky. A single spent cartridge marked the spot where his reign ended. Agents covered his body with a blanket as dusk surrendered to night. News broadcasts interrupted regular programming with his death announcement. Across Colombia, hearts pounded in shock, relief, and uncertainty. Crowds gathered outside police headquarters chanting, "Justicia, Justicia." Some wept, others cheered, and many whispered prayers for the fallen. Journalists jostled for photographs of Escobar's covered form. The morgue's corridors filled with the echo of hurried footsteps. A nation confronted the corpse of its greatest villain. International headlines proclaimed the fall of the king of cocaine. U.S. officials lauded the operation as a triumph of cooperation. Critics cautioned that splinter groups would rise to fill the void. Yet in that moment, triumph overshadowed the foreboding of tomorrow. The cartel's once unstoppable momentum lay shattered on a rooftop. In Medellin's barrios, children peered curiously at mural-covered walls. Murals once celebrating Escobar now defaced by grief-stricken artists. Vendors shouted over the hum of generators powering television sets. The city collectively exhaled under the weight of what had transpired. For a fleeting instant, the air felt lighter, though only barely. Officials cataloged evidence, weapons, ledgers, and secret files recovered at the scene. Forensic teams worked by lamplight to document every bullet fragment. Investigators transferred mountains of cartel data to secure vaults. Each seized document held a story of corruption, betrayal, and blood. The illuminated evidence foreshadowed prosecutions yet to come. As midnight approached, Colombia stood at the cusp of a new era. The blood-soaked climax of the Narco war had rendered its most notorious actor silent. Yet the embers of his legacy flickered in the shadows of fractured cartels. The battle lines shifted, promising new conflicts across the rugged terrain. And so, in the hush after violence, the nation faced its uncertain future. At dawn on December 3, 1993, President Gaviria addressed the nation with solemn resolve. He declared Escobar's death a turning point in Colombia's fight against narco terror. Across radio waves, messages of relief mixed with cautious warnings of renewed violence. Government buildings flew flags at half-mast for the victims of cartel terror. A fragile optimism flickered amid the ashes of years-long conflict. In Medellin, neighborhoods once under Escobar's thumb saw immediate power vacuums. Local enforcers and small-time traffickers scrambled to claim territory. Shootouts erupted in deserted streets, signaling a new chapter of fragmentation. For many residents, the end of El Patrón meant only a shift in the nature of fear. The war among successors promised fresh bloodshed. The Cali cartel, long overshadowed, seized the moment to expand its networks. Under the Ochoa brothers' cautious leadership, they brokered alliances with paramilitary militias. Their operations favored bribery and influence over overt violence, at least initially. International cocaine shipments dipped in brutality but grew in volume. Quietly, a new dominion consolidated in the shadows. Former Escobar lieutenants faced arrest or assassination as informants revealed hidden caches. Gustavo Gaviria was captured alive in July 1990, his fate a grim foreshadowing of others to come. Dozens of mid-level operators surrendered under immunity deals, spilling cartel secrets. The mountain of seized evidence filled courtrooms with damning ledgers and coded tapes. The legal machinery groaned under the weight of processing hundreds of narco cases. Extraditions of named traffickers to the United States accelerated in 1994. Convoy-guarded flights carried defendants into maximum security prisons abroad. Their testimonies from U.S. cells fueled further indictments back home. Colombian judges leveraged these depositions to dismantle remaining cartel cells. The specter of extradition became a final deterrent against large-scale trafficking. In Bogotá, a special prosecutor's office dedicated to narco terror was inaugurated. Victims' families marched to demand reparations and closure. Human rights advocates pressured for comprehensive truth-seeking mechanisms. The judiciary, once intimidated, asserted its role in restoring public faith. A cautious trust in institutional justice began to regrow. The search bloc was formally disbanded, its officers reassigned across anti-narcotics units. Colonel Martinez received commendations before returning to civilian policing. His methods informed the creation of future special operations forces. Tactical doctrines born in the narco hunt spread throughout Latin America. The lessons of La Catedral and its collapse became case studies in counterinsurgency. Meanwhile, right-wing paramilitary groups coalesced under the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC. They claimed to protect landowners from guerrillas but also profited from drug routes. Their presence introduced new layers of conflict in rural regions. Former cartel havens now echoed with the rumble of military vehicles. The ideological map of violence in Colombia grew ever more complex. International donors rallied behind Plan Colombia, launched in 1999 to combat drugs and insurgency. U.S. military aid flowed in exchange for fumigation programs and rural development. Counter-narcotics brigades targeted coca fields with herbicides carried by low-flying helicopters. Critics decried environmental damage and displacement of peasant farmers. The war on drugs expanded into a multi-billion-dollar geopolitical campaign. In Medellin, municipal leaders unveiled ambitious urban renewal projects in former cartel zones. Overgrown lots transformed into parks, and murals replaced graffiti of narco heroes. Community centers offered vocational training to wary youth. Schools reopened under tight security protocols to prevent extortion. The city sought to reclaim its identity from decades of terror. International journalists arrived in droves, filming documentaries on the rise and fall arc. Television specials dissected every facet of Escobar's empire from humble beginnings to violent end. Survivors' testimonies lent human faces to statistics of death and corruption. These productions fueled global fascination with narco culture for years to come. Colombia's story became a cautionary tale broadcast worldwide. Former cartel safe houses were converted into museums and memorial sites. Visitors walked halls lined with bullet holes and makeshift shrines. Placards recounted the names of victims forgotten in the frenzy of headlines. Guides recounted stories of bravery by police informants and civilians alike. History was curated to confront citizens with their collective past. In rural Antioquia, coca eradication and alternative livelihood programs took root. Coffee cooperatives and handicraft workshops sought to lure farmers away from illicit crops. Government incentives offered microloans contingent on crop substitution. Though progress was uneven, some communities reported marked declines in coca cultivation. A fragile promise of sustainable peace glimmered among weary campesinos. Regional governors enacted anti-corruption reforms to insulate local offices from narco influence. Civil society groups monitored municipal budgets with newly empowered ombudsmen. Transparency portals published public contracts online for the first time. While loopholes persisted, the culture of impunity began to erode. Accountability emerged as a key pillar of post-Escobar governance. Former Escobar bodyguards turned state's evidence described clandestine executions. Their confessions revealed torture chambers hidden beneath Isabella's hacienda. Forensic teams exhumed mass graves, giving names back to the nameless dead. Truth-seeking commissions cataloged atrocities as part of national reconciliation. These grim findings underscored the human cost of narcotics at every level. In Colombian cinemas, films like La Virgen de los Sicarios confronted audiences with narco violence. Directors blended documentary footage with cinematic reenactments to evoke visceral empathy. Critics argued that art risked glamorizing the underworld it depicted. Yet filmmakers insisted on bearing witness to history's darkest chapters. Cultural production became a battleground for collective memory. Educational curricula integrated modules on the drug trade and its societal impacts. University courses in anthropology, law, and public policy framed Colombia's narco era as a case study. Scholars published articles tracing the interplay of poverty, politics, and cartels. Conferences convened survivors, policymakers, and international experts in dialogue. Academia became a forum for processing the nation's trauma. By the late 1990s, Medellin's homicide rate began a slow, steady decline. Tourists returned cautiously to coffee country haciendas and Andean trails. Local entrepreneurs promoted Medellin's renaissance in travel brochures. Yet echoes of gunfire remained in the collective subconscious. The city's rebirth was testament to resilience amid lingering scars. Former cartel financiers faced money laundering trials that stretched into the 21st century. Asset forfeiture laws grew more rigorous under judicial reform. Banks instituted due diligence measures to screen suspicious transactions. Financial intelligence units coordinated internationally to trace illicit flows. The architecture of kleptocracy was dismantled piece by piece. As Colombia entered the new millennium, the shadow of Escobar receded but never fully vanished. His exploits became the subject of warnings in boardrooms and classrooms alike. Policymakers framed the fight against organized crime as ongoing rather than concluded. The chapters of violence and resistance lay open for future generations to study. And so, in the calm after tumult, Colombia charted a path toward redemption and vigilance. In the silent streets of early morning Bogotá, citizens awoke to a cautious sense of relief. Government bulletins praised the end of El Patrón's terror as a milestone in national restoration. Yet in hushed living rooms, families still counted the cost in lives and lost futures. The capital's skyline gleamed under a hopeful sun, even as its heart bore fresh scars. Colombia entered its next chapter, tempered by memory and wary optimism. Courts convened to process thousands of narco-related cases, stretching the justice system to its limits. Judges navigated complex immunity agreements and extradition precedents with heavy deliberation. Public prosecutors compiled exhaustive dossiers from seized ledgers and witness testimonies. Each verdict sent a message that illicit power would no longer evade accountability. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but with newfound determination. Truth commissions gathered testimonies from survivors of cartel violence across the Andes. Tearful recollections detailed evenings of blood, betrayals, and fragmented communities. Commissioners listened with solemn understanding, their notebooks brimming with names to remember. The process of reconciliation began with the simple act of acknowledging past horrors. Collective healing unfurled tentatively in towns once gripped by fear. Political reforms sought to insulate electoral processes from narcotics money. Campaign finance laws imposed stringent disclosures on candidates' funding sources. Independent watchdogs emerged to audit municipal budgets and investigate corruption. Though loopholes persisted, the curtain of secrecy over illicit funding was drawn back. Colombia's democratic institutions steeled themselves against future infiltration. Meanwhile, demobilization talks with right-wing paramilitaries gained momentum in the mid-1990s. Fighters laid down arms in exchange for transitional justice mechanisms and limited leniency. Rural communities witnessed both the relief of disarmament and the unease of reintegration. The fragile accords strained under accusations of incomplete disclosure and lingering violence. Yet the disbanding of these militias marked a critical step toward broader peace. Parallel negotiations with FARC guerrillas unfolded in tranquil jungle enclaves. Leaders across the ideological spectrum recognized the need to end decades of warfare. Coca substitution programs sprang up alongside confidence-building measures. Though distrust ran deep, each handshake across the negotiation table carried historic weight. The promise of a nationwide ceasefire shimmered on the horizon. Colombian artists transformed the narco era into murals, novels, and films grappling with collective trauma. Poets wrote elegies for the disappeared, while painters depicted shattered barrio skylines. Documentaries stitched together archival footage with survivors' intimate recollections. Cultural festivals dedicated to memory drew citizens into cathartic dialogues. Through art, the nation gave voice to mourning and hope alike. On the global stage, the United Nations held its first special session on transnational organized crime. Member states adopted protocols to enhance extradition, asset freezing, and cross-border cooperation. Colombia's experiences under Escobar served as cautionary case studies. International law enforcement networks formalized information-sharing platforms. The world's approach to drug trafficking evolved into a united front. Debate over drug policy reform sparked new interest in harm reduction and decriminalization. Academics published studies on the societal impact of prohibition versus regulated markets. Policymakers cautiously explored pilot programs for safe consumption sites. Colombia's own experiment with coca coffee crop substitution informed global discourse. The narco legacy drove reflection on alternative strategies to endless prohibition. Museums in Medellin erected exhibits chronicling the rise and fall of the cartel era. Visitors walked through reconstructed lab models and interactive documentary stations. Personal artifacts, scarred cell doors, sealed briefcases of money confronted audiences with lived reality. Educational plaques stressed lessons learned rather than sensationalism. Each display invited solemn reflection on the price of unbridled power. Urban planners repurposed former cartel strongholds into public parks and cultural centers. Abandoned villas gave way to libraries where children read under the branches of jacaranda trees. Concrete blocks that once cordoned off neighborhoods transformed into art spaces. Community gardens replaced clandestine airstrips in the hills above the city. Medellin's landscape bore testament to rebirth through collective effort. Narco culture's influence persisted in music genres like narco corridos, prompting critical debate. Radio stations alternated between condemning lyrical glorification and defending free expression. Critics argued that uncritical consumption risked romanticizing violence. Artists countered that storytelling must confront history in all its complexity. The dialogue underscored the tension between memory and myth. Financial regulators instituted rigorous anti-money laundering frameworks. Banks deployed advanced analytics to flag suspicious transactions in real time. International consortia shared blacklists of sanctioned individuals and entities. Asset seizure operations repatriated millions to fund victims' reparations. The architecture of illicit finance faced unprecedented scrutiny. Yet in the shadows, new organized crime groups emerged to fill the void left by fractured cartels. Local gangs diversified into kidnapping, extortion, and cyber scams. Law enforcement adapted by creating specialized cybercrime and anti-extortion units. The fight against organized crime entered a digital frontier fraught with novel challenges. The lessons of Escobar's era informed strategies against evolving threats. Civil society organizations sprouted nationwide to monitor human rights and anti-corruption. Volunteers documented cases of abuse, ensuring no disappearance went unrecorded. Grassroots networks provided psychosocial support to trauma survivors. These citizen-led initiatives reinforced the state's efforts toward transparency. Collective vigilance became a bulwark against the return of unchecked power. Universities launched interdisciplinary programs on narcotics policy and transitional justice. Scholars published comparative analyses of drug war models across the Americas. Conferences convened policymakers, survivors, and researchers to share best practices. Academic journals dedicated special issues to the ramifications of narco terror. Knowledge exchange platforms solidified a new field of study. The Colombian diaspora spread stories of survival and resilience to global audiences. Memoir by expatriates recounted narrow escapes and acts of solidarity. International book tours and film festivals amplified Colombian voices in the struggle for memory. Exiled journalists maintained pressure on homeland reforms from afar. The world learned not only of violence but also of the steadfast spirit that endured it. Over time, the myth of Pablo Escobar as a folk hero unraveled under critical scrutiny. Historians highlighted the human toll, the nameless dead and shattered communities. Documentaries juxtaposed extravagant mansions with the ruins of forgotten barrios. The narrative shifted from sensationalism to sober analysis of systemic factors. Escobar's legacy became a cautionary tale rather than a legend. As digital technologies advanced, new tools emerged for crime prevention and historical preservation. AI-powered databases cross-referenced decades of police records and financial transactions. Virtual reality reconstructions allowed students to explore key sites of the narco era. These innovations kept memory alive while enhancing transparency. The intersection of technology and history ensured that lessons of the past would guide the future. In the twilight of the 20th century, Colombia stood transformed by tragedy and resilience. The story of Pablo Escobar and his empire echoed as a stern warning against unchecked ambition. Citizens embraced vigilance, justice, and remembrance as pillars of their national identity. The era's chapters closed with a collective vow: never again would narco terror define their destiny. And so, from the ashes of violence, Colombia forged a legacy of hope and unwavering resolve. From the ash-stained halls of La Catedral to that fateful rooftop showdown, Escobar's reign of terror was extinguished, but its legacy still echoes in Colombia's streets. His downfall didn't end the war on drugs, it fractured into new cartels and paramilitary conflicts that shaped a nation. If this deep dive captivated you, smash that like button, drop your thoughts below and subscribe for more untold histories. Up next, Colombia's post-Escobar transformation. Click here to watch.